Around this corner here, we'll enter into the Paris household. Now over here we have Tituba. She's the next to be accused. She's an enslaved woman in the Paris household who spends quite a lot of time with the girls. She teaches them how to cook and clean and sew and all sorts of things like that while their mother was busy. But unfortunately, the fact that she spends so much time with the girls will make her the prime suspect in the neighborhood's eyes when they're trying to figure out who supposedly corrupted these girls into witchcraft. And after quite a bit of suggestion from the neighbors, Abigail Williams, one of the first to become afflicted, will say that it was Tituba who did it. Tituba will also be the first person to confess to witchcraft, but she really only does so after several days' worth of beating from Reverend Paris, and really given the option to either confess to something she didn't do, or run the risk of getting beaten to death. And after that, Tituba is forced to name names on who the other witches in town may be. When Tituba isn't able to give an answer, Reverend Paris starts to suggest names to her, and basically a top 10 list of all the other easy scapegoats in town. And given no other choice, Tituba must say, yes, these are the other witches, thus beginning the accusations that will very quickly spiral out of control. Now, over here we have Betty Paris suffering from her afflictions. Betty is the first to come down with these unusual symptoms, with her cousin Abigail following a few days later. These would include things like muscle spasms and convulsions, contorting their bodies into strange and painful angles, staring off into nothingness for hours at a time, suddenly crying out in pain, saying they felt as if they'd been pinched or bitten by something, and yet there was nothing there that could have possibly done that. These sorts of concerning symptoms don't just stay within the Paris household, though. They'll continue to spread throughout Betty and Abigail's friend group, and then will spread further from there, afflicting both other children and adults alike. And of course, wherever these afflictions go, the accusations will be closely following. Out here, we come out into Salem Village, where the accusations are in full swing.
Teenage girls of Salem, who accused Tituba and the neighboring men and women of witchcraft, were hired to travel to all the towns and villages of Essex County to point out the witches who dwelled there. Everyone was afraid of being called a witch. Brother turned on sister, child on mother, neighbor on neighbor. Old folks, disfigured ones, the mentally disturbed, and those who acted strangely were lined up in the village green, and the girls pointed out the witches. The sheriff and his pikemen immediately carted them off to jail to await examination, possible trial, and probable execution.
Now, although these are the Salem witch trials, these accusations and afflictions will end up in 34 different towns and cities across Massachusetts. In fact, they'll end up being more accused from outside Salem than from within. But all the trials will be coming back to Salem to be settled in a special witchcraft court. Before we go to that, though, we'll check back in with George Burroughs and go to the scene of his arrest up in Maine.
The former Puritan minister of the Salem Village Church, George Burroughs, is accused by the girls of being the devil himself. A noted strongman, Burroughs is captured at his house in Wells, Maine, by the cruel Salem sheriff, George Corwin, and his deputies. But he battles his captors, and when a storm suddenly erupts, the lawmen are terribly frightened, for they are convinced that they have captured the devil himself, and he will strike them down with bolts of lightning. Shaking with fear, the lawmen deliver Burroughs to the Salem judges. He is found guilty of witchcraft, and is condemned to hang at Gallows Hill.
Now, over here, we have the Court of Order and Terms, a special witchcraft court that was set up in Salem by the governor. And rather hastily, as he had just been appointed governor about a few months earlier. In fact, by the time he lands back in Massachusetts after being in London, it's already 2 months into the trial, and people are saying we need a court to handle this. And the fact that it was put together pretty quickly is really a major flaw of what allows these things to happen in Salem. This court allows this sort of invisible evidence known as spectral evidence, which was based mostly on the idea that witches were able to take their soul, their spirit, that sort of thing, send it out of their body invisibly, and use that to attack others. And only the witch and the victim could see this invisible attack happening. Spectral evidence also included things like dreams and visions and hallucinations, as we would know nowadays. But this idea that only the victim and the witch can see this attack happening means that really only the accuser and the accused can even speak on this evidence. But in a court system before the idea of innocent until proven guilty, most people in the courtroom already believed the accused to be a witch, and so we're really not going to take anything seriously that a supposed witch is saying on what's happening. They're just going to listen to the accuser. And whether or not this accuser actually genuinely believed what they were saying, well, that would really depend on the accuser. There was, of course, people who did genuinely think they were being bewitched by evil spirits and thinking, well, I got to find who's doing this. But there was also definitely people who sort of took advantage of the chaos to pin charges on people they didn't like. Most notably the Putnams, one of the largest accusing groups in the witch trials, is pretty commonly theorized to have just sort of been doing it out of spite. And there was also people who didn't genuinely believe in what they were saying, but were being manipulated into it by either their parents, their friend groups, all sorts of things. Really, when it comes to why these accusations were happening, it's really sort of on a case-by-case basis. But this sort of reliance on spectral evidence is really what makes these Salem witch trials in particular able to be so destructive over such a short period of time. Salem isn't the first time that there was witch trials in America. There have been occasional witch trials for about 100 years by this point. But usually, nothing would come of it. Occasionally, a person would be executed. A couple of times there was 2, but most of the time, these witch trials just ended in the accused witch being found innocent and the accuser being sued for defamation. This is because in these trials, they sort of had a higher standard of what was allowed to be evidence. They wouldn't allow invisible stuff like this spectral evidence, and so a lot of the time there just wasn't enough to convict people. But with this spectral evidence, well, you can really do anything you want as long as you have a believable enough story. But one of the sort of last things to happen on the sort of timeline of events of the witch trials is that the governor bans the use of spectral evidence from any more of these cases. And he realizes just how bad things have gotten in Salem, and he says, well, the spectral evidence is not reliable, we can't use it anymore. And although this won't bring an immediate end to the witch trials, there will be still some more accusations and the trials themselves. But what this brings an end to is the guilty convictions. Without this spectral evidence, they don't have anything. And so no one can be found guilty of witchcraft without it. Now, over here we have a specific form of spectral evidence, the idea of the familiar.
No, pet.
All witches kept at their side little imps of strange animals called familiars. They were given to witches as pets by the devil, and these little demons could appear or disappear at will, and they could make themselves larger or smaller at will, or so thought the superstitious Puritans. A witch's ward was where familiars sucked bloody milk. I saw Bridget Bishop's familiar, testified John Lauder before the Salem court in 1692. It was a black thing that jumped into my window, and it came and stood before my face. The body looked like a monkey, only the feet were like cock's feet with claws, and the face was somewhat more like a man than a monkey's. The black cat is, of course, the most familiar of witch familiars.
Now, over here we come to Gallows Hill, and the important thing, Gallows Hill.
On August 19th, 1692, about half a mile away from where you are standing now, George Burroughs, thought to be the devil, was hanged at Gallows Hill with 4 others. New England's leading Puritan minister, Cotton Mather, was there, riding a white horse. When Burroughs was on the ladder to hang, wrote eyewitness Robert Califf, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocence, with such solemn and serious expressions as were the admiration of all present. His Lord's Prayer drew tears from many, so it seemed to some spectators that it would hinder the execution. But Cotton Mather addressed himself to the people, declaring that the devil has often been transformed into an angel of light, which somewhat appeased the people, and the execution went on.
Now over here we have what happened after the execution. These victims were cut down and burned nearby. That would be wicked and left here to rot. Or at least that was the intention. In actuality, although it was very illegal to remove anything from the witch's pit, and getting caught doing so would probably led to an execution, and that didn't stop multiple families from going out in the middle of the night in order to retrieve the body of their loved one who had been executed, and bringing them home and giving them a secret burial. John Proctor, Rebecca Nurse, had passed down to both of their families that they were given secret graves on the family land. And you can only hope that may have brought home just a little bit of peace of mind. And there really wouldn't have been anything you could do to save the accused during the trials themselves. And so I suppose the little one thing that you did hold power over was, to at least give them a proper Puritan burial, and to bury them somewhere close by where I suppose you could always visit. Now, over here we once again have Cotton Mather. Now, Cotton Mather was one of the few people who was able to publish a book on the witch trials in the 10 years after they happened. But his book, Wonders of the Invisible World, is quite pro-witch trials. And well, his section on George Burroughs really shows how deeply this sort of fear and hatred for the accused really went. And he basically starts off the section by saying that he wished he didn't have to write on George Burroughs, but he's being pressured into it because people want a more full account of the trials. And he basically finishes up the section as quickly as he can. And all the other sections run for at least a couple of pages, but George Burroughs' section is really only about a half a page, maybe 3/4 of a page. And he doesn't even refer to George Burroughs by name during it. He just calls him GB instead, and refusing to refer to such an evil man by his full title. And so you can see how he genuinely believed that this was an evil, devilish man. And yet this evidence that was used against George Burroughs is it's the same sort of stuff that was used against most other people. A lot of rumors and hearsay, and stuff like, well, he cursed his wife to never speak of his secrets. Or, well, he was able to lift up a cart with his own hands. The sort of things that, people said, but didn't have any evidence for, really. And yet they were still taken as valid evidence to be used against him until, of course, was found guilty and executed for it. And Cotton Mather, it's not like he was a foolish guy. I mean, of course, he fell for this hysteria like anyone else. It was, he was quite book smart. He was, well versed in science, theology, was even a little bit ahead of his time in terms of medicine. And yet that doesn't make a person immune from falling into this hysteria and very genuinely believing that this innocent man was really a demon. Now, when it comes to Salem and ghost stories, we've had many, and some of them have been around for quite a while, including this tale of a supposed curse of Drowned Corey that's been around for centuries by this point. And it's been prominent enough in local lore that the wrote on it was Salem of the one of his sons, Nathaniel Hawthorne. And he'll tell you about that here.
Tradition is long current in Salem, wrote Salem's noted author, Nathaniel Hawthorne, that at stated periods, the ghost of Giles Corey, the wizard, appeared on the spot where he had suffered as the precursor of some calamity that was impending over the community, which the apparition came to announce. Old Giles Corey was a pitiful creature, in his 80s, when he was led to the field beside the Salem jail, now the Howard Street burial ground. On September 19th, 1692, he was laid in a pit and crushed to death with stones by Sheriff Corwin and his deputies, cursing Salem and the sheriff as he died. His wife was hanged at Gallows Hill 3 days later. Nobody knows exactly where old Giles was buried, but as Hawthorne says, his ghost returns to the burial grounds at times of great calamities in Salem. He was seen many times, roaming the graveyard in early 1914, before a fire devastated the city, starting at Gallows Hill and destroying all in its path as it swept to the waterfront. Ironically, the flames leapt over the old homes of the historic district like unseen hands. Giles Corey's ghost continues to appear, as Nathaniel Hawthorne predicted, during times of great disaster and as a reminder of Salem's tragic legacy, the witch hysteria.